So all good with you guys? Good week so far?
Beautiful, man.
To the end of the year, just coasting.
I'm glad that you're coasting. I can't relate to that at all.
I got a little more work to close out the year, but thankfully my council has allowed me to kind of, I'm going back to Bellefonte next week, but then after I come home, I'm going to just work remote from up here in New York for the rest of the year, which I was very appreciative of. So I am looking forward to a little time with the kiddos and just cruise control. I mean, there'll be stuff to do, of course, as there always is. It just won't be as demanding for those last couple of weeks, and I'll be able to reflect back on what's been quite a turbulent year all in all.
No
what
budget
doesn't
goals.
get
Hey, Dave, you survived it. You made it to the end of the year. You're in one tack, and you got another year ahead of you. So.
There you go, my friend.
Amen, brother.
Okay. Welcome back, Generation on the Rise. This is where we go there. Here with my good friends, Dave and Brandon. The topic of the week, strategic planning. Couldn't be more timely as we get to the end of the calendar year here in Pennsylvania. Strategic planning, what does that mean in the short term? What does that mean in the long term? How does it guide our actions, our budget development, which many of us just went through, closing out now, and executing the year ahead and the years ahead as we think in a multi-year time frame. We're going to do opening statements here, but I'll tell you guys, when I think of strategic planning, I think of it as like having a good rudder to steer the ship as to where we're going, and to help me and help the board with resource allocation to accomplish their policy priorities while we continue to deliver first-rate government services. When you think strategic planning, what comes to mind?
Go ahead, Brandon.
I want to hear.
I have a love-hate relationship with strategic planning, right?
Love-hate relationship. Oh my.
Yeah, I do. I love it. It's essential. It's the rudder. It's the guidepost. I always say the guiding light.
Soap opera.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom was a big soap opera fan, but it provides our direction, right? And it's essential so we know where we're going and why we're doing things, right? So we're not just doing things because that's what we are expected to do. There's an end goal here, right? The hate part is unless you're really involved, or at least you know what you're doing, it's too easy for strategic planning, whether it's an annual strategic plan, setting priorities, or comprehensive plans. It gets too aspirational, it gets too watered down, impractical.
You define, how do you measure that?
I mean, I'll take, for example, one thing that has been niche, lately, sustainability plans or incorporating parts of sustainability. I'm all for sustainability. Like, I'm pretty much an environmentalist. I have a hybrid in my driveway. I try to reduce my energy uses, but to have declaratory statements saying, oh, we are going to transition to 100% renewable energy by X date without identifying how, purely aspirational, right? You're making big assumptions that you're going to have the capital to invest, the political willpower to do it, and the organizational capacity to undertake it.
Wait a second. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? If you don't make those declaratory statements in your comprehensive plan or in a strategic plan, and how can you ever have the conversation of what resources need to be allocated, whether it's raising capital or something else, in order to accomplish it? Do you sit around and wait until you have all the resources and capital and then make those aspirational statements?
When you make aspirational statements, and this is how I approach strategic planning, it has to be grounded with practicality. If you're going to make a statement in whatever planning efforts, I'm just going to pick on, the energy transition stuff. If you're going to say we're going to transition to whatever by whatever date, at least identify some steps to take along the way. Say we're going to explore solar installations. We're going to convert the municipal fleet. We're going to do this. We're going to reduce our energy consumption through energy audits. It is one thing to say, yes, we're going to transition to 100% renewable. Purely aspirational, not really grounded. But it's a whole different undertaking if you say, this is what we're going to do, transition, and this is how we're going to go about it, right? We're not going to have all the numbers, but that will give you a better sense of direction. Like, how are we going to do this? We're going to achieve that transition by A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I think of when I think of the phrase rubber hits the road. If your strategic plan is your road, that's your guide, your roadmap. That's how you're going to get from where you are now to where your public officials want to see your community go. Hopefully that's driven by community sentiment and engagement. And then the rubber is those action steps you're talking about. I think we're getting where we're going to go with this episode, which is the marriage between strategic thinking and innovation and implementation and actionable items. I had a board member when I first started my career. He's an institution in Ferguson Township, moved there in 1966. And when I did the first strategic plan I ever did, which was 10 years ago, his phrase was cross-offable. And I've never lost that word in my mind. Are these action steps cross-offable? So I don't necessarily disagree with you, Brandon, but I do think there's space for both in a strategic plan, a good cogent document, to have the pie in the sky, aspirational kinds of things, and then also have reachable, cross-offable objectives and action steps that fall under that umbrella. Umbrella has always been the way I've described strategic planning, which is you've got your strategic plan from your board, which comes from your community, and that's the umbrella that overhangs your other documents that give you more specific direction, including your budgets, your CIP, all your small area planning. I think your strategic plan is at the top of that hierarchy. Eden
So
doesn't agree.
I don't agree.
Yeah,
I agree
I
with
wanna
some
hear
of the
that.
latter parts of what you said. I think that the comprehensive plan sits on top, right? Like I think it goes community, governing body, comp plan becomes that like sort of top overarching aspirational document that sort of says this is the direction that we're trying to take our community, the things that we want to accomplish. Your comprehensive plan, when it's developed, should be incredibly robust, should have a lot of community engagement, steering committees, and all that sort of stuff. To me, that can be a longer document. I've heard more recently people say like 6 to 10 years. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I do think there should be a reflection period of have we accomplished everything or most things in this comprehensive plan? Do we still identify with it and the things it's telling us to accomplish, where it's steering us, and do we need more time? So I think extensions can be appropriate. That's probably a hot take, but that's where I'm at.
Plan is, to me, it connotates a land use document because
It's on the community, right?
Yeah,
Right
I
on
agree
land
with
use.
what Dave said about the land use aspect, for sure. Land use.
it doesn't need to be, but I think when you start to have extensions of that go beyond the land use components of it, you're sort of moving out of its core definition in the municipality's planning code, which, by the way, for those of our listeners that are outside of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is sort of I think every municipality in Pennsylvania, with the exception of the city of Brotherly Love, has to fall under the guidance of the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code and its statutory and regulatory kinds of things that it vests
Is
in.
Pittsburgh not exempt?
I don't believe so. I could be wrong about that. I heard
I know they've
once.
made changes
No,
over there
the only
from
one
state law to Pittsburgh,
exempt
but
is the Commonwealth of Philadelphia.
gotcha.
Is the
The Commonwealth.
yeah. So I don't disagree, but I think when
I'm
you
not
get too
disagreeing
far,
with you either. I think your perspective well rooted. I do think it can be a little bit more broad. What I was going to say next is that sort of underneath that is that shorter term document, which is a strategic plan, which in my opinion, we haven't gotten here yet, should be an actual document that the governing body like helps develop with input from the community, with input from the staff of this is where we're going to be allocating resources. It should be shorter, right? It shouldn't be a 10-year document. I'm thinking like 3 to 5. I know some communities sort of do variations of strategic planning on an annual basis. I think some things take more than a year to accomplish. So there does make sense for there to be sort of a multi-year strategic plan. I think that should be a fall off from the comprehensive plan and should also be easily linkable to some of the objectives and other master plans that you might have. This creates a web or a tree, if you think about it like that, of all the planning that we do and where we're allocating resources.
Ian,
That's sort of
let me share an
my
example.
perspective.
Lower Merion does something phenomenal that I really thoroughly enjoy and really relish.
Mutual Admiration Society when it comes
know,
to Lower
right?
Merion. We're all with you.
Well,
Right.
you all work for great communities too. Here's
do.
what our Board of Commissioners does. Every year, they have a priorities meeting, right? And this is done usually like March, early spring, right? And we operate committees of the whole. Our commissioners have a sustainability committee, they have a police committee, what have you. So they all meet individually in their committees. During this priorities workshop, this is the only thing on the agenda. And each of the committee comes up with, 1 or 2 or 3 items they would like the staff to work on in the coming year. Usually it's carryovers from the previous year. Hey, this is what we've been able to achieve under this, task, or this is where, we're looking to go with this. But they do that every year, right? And it sets a good guiding light, right, for us when, as we're working through and as we get into the capital budgeting season over the summer and the formal budgeting season in the fall. We enjoy that because now we know what our board, our elected officials want.
So let's break that down for a second. So this coming March, you're going to have a priority setting meeting. So March 2026, and that's going to feed into the summer of 26 capital budget discussions, theoretically for 2027. Does that mean that the priorities they set in the spring of 26 don't really start being effectuated until budget year 27?
If it's a capital need, we try to inform them when they set up their priorities. They do it in consultation with staff, right? 2 years ago, our building planning committee identified rehashing our rental license as one of their priorities. We have a lot of student rentals in our community. And prior to the change that we implemented, all rentals were created equal. They were all treated equal, which, Going through that process after they identified it in March of 24, we had ordinance change. So we didn't have to wait until, the following year or the budget. We can just work on it. And then by that fall of 24, we had a brand new rental license program that we got adopted through ordinance. So some things yes, some things no.
What are they referencing in March when they go through this? Are they looking at the previous year accomplishments or what's happening?
Some of them are looking at, all right, what have we been able to do? What were we able to achieve? Given that it's the only thing on the agenda that night, the first slide in everyone's presentation is like, look at what we've been able to do over the past year. Here are the priorities we identified last year. These are our accomplishments. Here's where we're going next.
So I don't do it like this, but that sounds pretty interesting. I think I'd like to go to the March meeting. It's a public
Yeah.
meeting, right?
All these are public
Dave, what do you
meetings.
think?
Yeah.
Generation on the rise, on the road?
Oh, Generation on
Yep.
the Road. I love it.
Yeah, there we
Generation on
go.
the road.
We'll just go. We'll be incognito in the back. We can see how it plays out. Talk about it later.
I'll bring my
It'll be interesting because it is a reorganization year. We're getting 5 new elected officials out of the 14, which is the most we've ever experienced. We're going to have the most newbies on our boards. An interesting experience.
What I like is having that strategic plan, which should be developed through a robust process, being able to say to the elected body year over year, okay, this is the strategic plan that you develop. Here's where we are. Here's a check-in in terms of the progress that we've made. Here's the resources that the previous year budget allocates to continue to make progress on these plans. This is sort of where we're headed next year. I like to bring as many conversations and policy priorities back to that document because, like I said at the beginning of the episode, that document becomes a rudder in terms of setting the direction that they want to go. And when we start having budget conversations, if members of the community say, why are you allocating resources here or there? I'll say it goes back to the strategic plan. One of the things that it prevents, which is challenging, is like the rogue policy priority that maybe never came up before and doesn't have a lot of support that we try to throw funding at in the budget process. It gives us something we can look at and say, we didn't discuss this in strategic planning. This is a document that is a filtration from the comprehensive plan, from the various master plans we have. We have an organized government here in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. We're not just winging it year in and year out, a little bit more organized. A little bit different than Brandon, but I'm not necessarily opposed to what's happening over there in Lower Merion in terms of priority setting. But I do think more globally, we can be organized in how we're accomplishing things.
And, Eden, before you jump in, Dave, I don't mean to cut you off. This past March in 25, right? Towards the end of the year, I get confused on the numbers, right? March
We all do.
25, a leaf blower ban was identified as a priority. So that kind of set us off.
So let's run with that for a second. In my mind, the way that this can work is your comprehensive plan and other master plans can identify wanting to be carbon neutral and make progress in the environmental space as a goal. The strategic plan can sort of identify that even further of wanting to adjust policies and priorities within the operations of our local government to enhance our climate initiative and climate action goals to achieve carbon neutrality by XD. Okay, great. Well, now what we haven't gotten to, but I'll introduce it now. How do you operationalize some of your master plans? How do you operationalize your strategic plan? I like having an operational document that we also agree to underneath that specifically identifies things that we are going to do, cross-offable, this new word that I learned this morning, Dave, thanks to you and your person in Ferguson Township, that we can do. On that list that could be identified in the Lower Merion process could be evaluate and potentially implement, evaluate the potential implications of a leaf blower ban in our community. And then all of a sudden we're off to the races. Do you see that cascading effect down from these different plans? You start to see sort of the tree that I'm building in my mind?
Yeah, that's the magic of it, is when you can bridge those higher level goals and aspirational statements set by your board, bridge that with the day-to-day, with how we're managing our communities and administering our department heads and leadership team, and then by extension, all of the staff, community members, and volunteers that are helping us steer that ship towards the finish line. And for me, the application is also in the budgeting process. How do you translate those goals into resources allocated? My expectation has always been that my leadership team, as they're submitting their budget requests, the kinds of expenditures they're requesting that are maybe outside of the normal day-to-day operational kinds of things that they need to do, that they're tied to a strategic plan, action step, objective, or goal, and that they make that connection in their budget narratives, in how they're presenting that to me, to the board, to the community at large. And I think that has really forced some people that maybe have had decades of experience in their respective disciplines to think about how they're aligning their priorities, which may be based on their own lived experience in the communities they've served, how they marry those to what the governing body and the community have decided that they want that department to prioritize.
So we've talked about how the magic can happen with a few different flavors and styles. Is strategic planning only for the big communities? Is it only for major cities? Is it only for teams that have tons of township or borough staff that can do this? Dave, I want to kick this over to you. In small town America and some of our smaller boroughs throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the country, is strategic planning happening, and does it realistically happen in a different way? What's your experience there?
So I've written 2 strategic plans for Half Moon Township in Center County. It's more the rural reach of the State College metro area.
What's the population?
Very rural. I think it was under 3,000 when I wrote the first iteration of their strategic plan. So my answer to that is emphatically no. The smaller communities, in some respects, benefit more from that strategic visioning. They're more apt to have elected officials driven by a particular issue or have more diverse motivation for running for office. And I know that maybe seems counterintuitive when you think about the larger municipalities having obviously more people, more resources, perhaps more diversity of opinion and demographic. But I've found that in small communities, you get that variation amongst the governing bodies that amplifies the need to have that strategic guiding light, strategic planning document all the more.
Yeah, I agree. Having come from smaller communities also, I think the resources are fewer, the team is fewer, and so it's even more important to be organized around what we're trying to accomplish, when we're going to accomplish that, and what success looks like, having clear conversations around defining that. When it comes to resource allocation, the dollar can only go around in so many different places. Having consensus around what that looks like and where to allocate those resources becomes super important.
Yeah, but
So I think it's important for communities of all size.
Yeah.
To those of our listeners who are in smaller communities, I really can't stress enough how important it is to sort of get behind that. I agree with what Dave said there.
But need and reality often don't mesh, right? So, I can't speak it because I'm not in a smaller community, but in previous smaller communities, right? They are such short on staff that it's hard to find the time and resources to dedicate to strategic planning. Do I think it's important? Absolutely. But sometimes the reality of the situation is they don't have the time, the bandwidth, the resources to do it.
So are you guys doing it yourselves when you're engaging in strategic planning? Are you bringing in consultants? What does that process look like?
It depends for us, right? Like if something operationally we're currently doing, we'll do it in-house, right? Like I always say, Laura Marion we all have wonderful staffs, right? But we just have more of them. So we have the ability, we have the capacity to do a lot of stuff in-house. But if it is a special topic, for example, I'm pretty proud that we presented our affordable housing action plan last night. We subbed that out to a consultant who is in the affordable housing field. So we actually have a strategic planning document for affordable housing. So it all depends.
So how does that fit in the total tree of all the master plans you have, the overarching strategic plan, the policy priority setting process with the committee of the whole,
Yeah.
and then ultimately your comp plan? Where does that fit in? How does
So
that fight for resources?
Our comp plan identifies affordable housing as a goal. We have an ad hoc affordable housing committee looking at ways to increase affordable housing by looking at the zoning and consider other considerations, public-private partnerships, what have you, right? So it kind of gives another layer. What this plan does, it actually gives us recommendations on how do we expand ADUs. What do we set? What zoning districts?
So it's sort of
should
an
we look at?
operational plan.
Yeah,
And that's awesome. I love that.
it's kind of like you're cascading down, right? As
Yep.
you were saying, Eden. And now
Yeah.
we actually have, because here's the thing, right? And again, I love my community, but you can't just have a plan that says we're going to do something about affordable housing. Like
Right. One of the things I've learned through this podcast, and I already know this to be true about Dave too, is that we tend to be a little bit more operations minded. Like, how do we get the thing done? What does success look like? And how exactly do we complete that? And so it can be frustrating. And I know I really had to learn how to do this and to be patient with that process when you are at the aspirational levels of strategic planning, of comprehensive plan writing. And you're thinking, okay, well, what does success look like 50 years in the future? And then what do I do today in order to accomplish that? I'm interested in the today action or the next year action. What's the thing that resources need to be allocated to, that attention needs to be minded to in order to generate success on this thing, which is just another step in front of a step getting us to where we want
how do we
future to
get
be.
there? That's the
Right.
question I'm always asking. You could have the most beautiful, most thought-provoking plan in the entire world. But if it just sits on the shelf and you're not acting on it, what's the point?
Well, let's go there for a second, right? I
Well,
mean, we're
could
talking
I
about Dave.
can I make one comment on your last question? Because I'm glad you asked it. I was thinking, man, I hope he asked, because I've thought about this a lot over the last decade or so, which is, this question of who writes it. Does it need to be a third party? Can it be somebody from the call coming from inside the house? And like everything, there's a yin for every yang, right? I think that if you, as a manager or one of your leadership team, is taking the initiative to play the role of the consultant, draft the strategic plan, and work with the community on developing it, the positive that comes from that is that there's some institutional knowledge that is sort of is accompanying that momentum in development of that strategic plan. Now, on the flip side of that, I think there can also be a perception, and perhaps in some cases the reality, that it's influenced by the bias of the person that's helping to develop that plan document. Right, wrong, or indifferent may reflect poorly in its implementation. You might have that kind of reputation as you are advancing the action steps and objectives of that strategic plan and effort, that, well, this is only a priority because you were behind the development of it, or you were the one leading it. And I think that as managers, that can put us in a precarious position, because we don't want to overstep, our role as administrators and executives, and go into and veer into the policy development and agenda setting lane that our public officials control. I've done both and found pros and cons to either side of that. I think it depends on the environment and the community and the impact of having it developed by either a third-party consultant or a member of management or the leadership team.
Yeah, completely agree. One of the things that happened in the city of Charlottesville, my boss at the time saw that the city council was going in a bunch of different directions. And so the decision to bring in an outside consultant, which was Raph Ellis, who did an amazing job. Michelle Ferguson is incredible if you ever had the chance to work with her. They were able to come in as that neutral third party, not necessarily married to any decision that was made, and rally around and circle the wagons around the city council, around the staff. That leadership team is significant, both in their competency and commitment to the city, but also in terms of what they believe success looks like, and be able to whittle down what the strategic outcome areas were going to be, and then begin to start like figuring out what operational success looks like underneath that. And so the need for that third party was important, because there were so many different directions being gone in internally to the city that they were able to sort of help
Eden,
on some of that.
there are times that you're going to need a third party consultant. I've always encouraged with my staff, no matter where I am, right? And back when I was a teacher, I used to say this too. It's okay to admit you don't know something, right?
For sure.
People won't think any less of you. I tell my elected officials, particularly with this affordable housing stuff, because we did have questions, understandably so, why can't we do this in-house? You and speaking to me and our assistant planning director have been the leads on the side of staff for affordable housing. You all do this. You got this. You can do it. But we don't know what we don't know, right? I can't speak on something that I'm not even aware about. I am first to admit that when I don't know something, and it's okay. But now going through, process like this, being in outside firms to help inform us, we're building that internal capacity. So when we do a touch in a year or two, right, we can pretty much do that in-house, because we've gained so much knowledge going through this outside firm.
Yeah, my perspective was exactly what you guys are saying, that it doesn't have to be an outside firm, but there's a time and place for it. If you have the resources for it and the buy-in in your community, and you can go that way, it's certainly not going to hurt. I always sort of recommend an RFP in that process.
Mhm.
And to get references from those submitting for that. I've seen some comp plans, I've seen some strategic plans that are really not well written, and because it's usually not the expertise of the firm that did that work. So that's maybe a hot take there. Make sure you're doing your due diligence, as you always should.
Can I ask a
But a lot of
question?
great opportunities.
I'm just going to prompt you guys. What's the most memorable planning experience that you've participated in?
Most memorable planning experience. Oh man.
Good
Okay.
or good or bad? Dave, what about you?
I think that's subjective. What I find most enjoyable beneath the umbrella of strategic planning efforts are the small area plans. They are comprehensive plans, applying the land use application of that term on a smaller geographic area, maybe a neighborhood that you want to see some redevelopment in, or community revitalization, or whatever it might be. And one of the first ones I did was in Ferguson Township, in the village of Pine Grove Mills, which has a lot of history in it. It's a really community minded, kind of inset of Ferguson Township overall. It was great to engage that part of the community that I think traditionally didn't have the kind of voice that was influential in local government. They were more or less involved in community politics. But to hear how that village has evolved and new faces have moved in, what their vision is for their community, those small area plans are really where a lot of that community vibrancy and spirit shines. That for me was very meaningful personally and professionally.
What
Yeah,
about you,
that's
Ethan?
a good story, Dave. When I was the deputy city manager in Charlottesville, strategic planning was part of my portfolio. The city council had developed 9 strategic outcome areas along with a commitment to social equity. So 10 areas. My responsibility was to figure out, okay, well, what does success look like underneath these sort of 10 core competencies? And what was supposed to be a 3 or 5 year plan, there was some evolution in that, as it sort of played out. So what we did was I developed a team of city strategists internally. So we handpicked 112 city employees from every different rank in the hierarchy from the different offices and departments, tried to pull in different skill sets, different perspectives, people who are from the city, born and raised in the city, people who are from the outside. And we built teams underneath each strategic outcome area. And we had a smaller leadership team for the strategic plan who was sort of the facilitator in those groups, and then brought in Raftelis to sort of facilitate conversations about what short and long-term success looks like operationally, right? How we can operationalize those strategic outcome areas. And then the city management team under my boss's leadership identified priorities. 10 strategic outcome areas is a lot. It shows how much progress a city council wants to make, which is admirable and fantastic. But the best practice would be to whittle that down. Strategic planning is supposed to create direction and kind of focus areas, right? So we prioritize that in the 3 different groups, identified sort of operational takeaways underneath each strategic outcome area. And then that's what's being utilized, or the idea is that's what would be utilized to allocate resources to and provide direction to the different departments that are responsible for the takeaways underneath each strategic outcome area. And that gets measured and monitored and reported back to the city council. An imperfect process and an imperfect product. I'm describing it really well here. The reality is it was sort of fluid in many
Planning is
ways.
messy, right?
Yeah, planning is really messy. Allocation is messy. When city councils start changing, it gets complicated. And what was interesting as we had sort of these strategic outcome area teams, they were diverse, right? We didn't just put the climate folks underneath climate action. We also had transportation in there, the utilities department. Well, the utilities department, when you say things like we want to be carbon neutral, they say things like we're in the natural gas business and it's going to cost everyone $15,000 to change all their natural gas appliances, right? And that's a real part of the conversation. As Brandon said, it's easy to say go carbon neutral, but in terms of doing that, it becomes really challenging. There was some team development, including storming within the strategic outcome area teams, which is a good thing. That diversity of thought perspective throughout the city was important to create that. Difficult project, imperfect, I would say. I think we
Sounds
made a lot of
fascinating,
progress on
though.
it, but it was rewarding to be a part of, and I certainly learned a lot of good lessons going through it.
You got me thinking about a great point in what you said, which is that strategic planning cannot be a substitute for the deliberative and incremental processes that accompany public policy development. You cannot just say, well, my strategic plan says we're going to be 100% carbon neutral by 2030. So guess what? Next year, we're passing an ordinance that bans all non-renewable fuels from being used in my municipal boundary. And if you want to know why we're doing it, just go to the website and look at our strategic plan. It is not and cannot be a substitute for public policy processes that work and are effective.
So the comp plan in Middletown Township talks about development and allowing for development, getting into some land use stuff, Dave, like you were talking about earlier, and recognizing the demand for more density. Folks come to our meeting and they say, hey, I read the comp plan. I was a part of the comp plan process and I disagree what's in there. And that doesn't represent the entirety of the township. While I believe what those folks are saying, I understand their passion behind that. The response is it was a community-led process, right? There was a lot of community engagement. That doesn't mean that everyone in the community is going to love what was put together. I had an old boss who would say things like, a camel is a horse built by committee. At some point, a decision has to get made. Just because it's in the comp plan or the strategic plan doesn't mean you can just say, well, it's in there, so we're doing it. There's still the deliberation and policy setting process.
Absolutely.
Agreed. So, folks, what do you do when you have turnover on your boards? And they say, throw out the strategic plan. I hate everything in there. Don't like the comp plan. Don't intend to follow it. Want to change the zoning code. Maybe I don't like the subdivision and land development ordinance. That master plan, let it sit on the shelf. Glad you went through it, but I'm not there. We've all seen it. Politics is a real part, a necessary part of the democratic process. When you get folks on your board and they say, hey, thanks for all the work you're doing there, but we're not doing that. What do you do? Because you're still on the ship and now you've lost your rudder.
I think a lot of the magic in ensuring the continuity of your strategic plan as your board members transition on and off, is being able to defend the community input that went into the establishment of that plan. A lot of it is in the sausage making of that plan document itself. If you can tell your incoming elected officials that this plan document, they should have an awareness of that document. It's not that they can't be shifted, and often are, as new board members come on board. But if you just decide you're going to cross it off and start from scratch, or put it on the shelf and start over, or not do anything, that's a hard stop. And that's very difficult for us in government to react to, particularly as administrators. So I don't know that that answers your question.
I'm not against anything you said, but I think it's a difficult question to answer, right? I mean, what do you say?
That's why I didn't answer it.
Yeah.
Your government answer, well, it depends.
Let me a question I want to answer, not the one you asked.
Redirect. Perfect redirect.
Perfect redirect. Good job, Dave.
I think the question itself exposes the risk of having a high level plan, whether it's the comp plan, strategic plan, whatever, that kind of doesn't give enough detail, right? Like we're talking about the cross-offability. Is that a word? Cross-offability of it is, right? See,
Dave's writing.
We're making it up on the fly.
Yeah.
I like it. Dictionary. Here we come.
I wrote it down.
Cross-offability of, how do we get there, right? Because,
here goes Brandon back into operationalizing.
If you say affordable housing, that could be interpreted in so many different ways. I think
you got to put definitions around it, especially affordable housing. Perfectly fine for affordable and attainable housing. We need to have definitions so we know what we're talking about.
And I'll tell you, Eden, I was at the forum that Villanova hosted on affordable housing, and there were some people interchanging the two words. Those aren't the same thing. Attainable and affordable are not, from a housing perspective,
is key when it comes to putting definitions.
30% AMI and 80% AMI. That's tens of thousands of dollars difference.
That's one of the many things that Charlottesville does really well when they talk about affordable and attainable housing. They talk about it as a percentage of AMI. Yeah. For those who aren't familiar with AMI, it stands for area median income. And so area median income is a number that basically says this is how much you have to make to be able to minimally live. That number changes depending on how many dependents and incomes you have, in an area. I think AMI where I'm at is like 130. I'm not positive about that.
Philly Metro, it's 114.
114. Okay. That feels low.
Well, it includes Philadelphia. I'm sure not to discredit Philadelphia, but there are more, income.
And another number that United Way pushes out.
Alice.
Thank you.
Gosh, it's an acronym.
We always use HUD.
Income constrained, employed.
Asset limited income constrained, but employed. These are people who have a job, who make money, who lack assets, but they might not make enough money to survive. Yeah. The argument around Alice is those are the people who sort of get lost. They just need a little bit of a leg up in order to survive, but they don't qualify for all of the different programs at the state and federal level and the local level, depending on where you are, in order to help give them that leg up because they are working, but they don't have assets. Alice is a good number.
It's a great number.
General is very complicated, but to go back to your point,
we totally derailed, Brandon.
Sorry, I threw housing in there and went right on the
That's
sideball.
Another future. We should be talking about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But if you don't have that much detail, that operationalization has greater exposure. It leaves you more exposed to different interpretations of how the township should be getting there. And that's when you have the greatest risk, when you have turnover, because then, everybody comes in with new ideas and they're going to see things differently unless it's in sufficient detail that they have a firm understanding of, that's how we're going to get there. I might not agree with it, but it's leaves less to interpretation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got to say, too, one last point on that
is
that we do, I think, as managers need to understand that sometimes things are just going to change. We do need to give our boards the latitude to say, look, we're just going to blow this up and start over again. Sometimes you got to roll with the punches.
Yeah, I say it all the time. I'm willing to defer to the wisdom of the elected body. They are there for a reason. Politics and the election process, getting members onto the elected board is a necessary part of democracy. They're the ones who should be setting the direction. Do I think we should be throwing out plans every 2 years or every time there's an election? No, not as a rule, but there needs to be leeway for that process to play out the way that it needs to.
You got to pivot.
So we're getting towards the end of the hour here. Question, and I want quick reactions here. Brandon, we're going to go to you first. Failing to plan is planning to fail.
True.
Dave, any exceptions to that?
I will say unforeseen circumstances or situations, right? You're not going to be able to plan for every single exact scenario. I think there are exceptions, especially, this will resonate with you, Eden. Emergency response. You're never going to be able to really, expect and cover all your bases for like an emergency situation, but you should have a generalized game plan that is flexible enough that you
Um,
can kind of adapt to a situation.
I think there are a lot of emergency plans, and you can plan for a lot of different types of emergencies that should be informed by the risk profile of
But
your
you're never going to be able
community.
to cover everything.
No, you can't cover everything, but to say that we're only going to have a generalized plan, I think lacks a little bit of specificity. And I think where a lot of communities struggle, and I know Bucks County is working on this now, is dealing with managing the incident after the fact. So you have a major incident that happens, you handle that incident, but what about all the fallout? A lot of people don't think about debris management, right? After storms, there's stuff everywhere that
Yeah.
has to be dealt with. It's got to be processed. It's got to go somewhere. You need a robust debris management plan. Chester County just rolled one out 3 years ago. Bucks County is working on one now. Those are things that I think get forgotten about. But I think when it comes to major emergency planning, there really should be robust plans that cover a lot of different types of things. That literally there's a checklist of, have we done this? Have we done this? Do we have these contractors on standby that can help with some of these incidents? I talked about the house
Yeah.
fire that's happening in my district this morning at 1:30. They already know that they can rely on our public works department to bring barricades to demolish the garage that's on fire as they're trying to get the embers out. Like, all of that needs to be figured out in advance
Wholeheartedly
of the
agree.
incident. One of the things that's driving me crazy these days is outside contractors that help high risk entities within your community. So think schools, nursing homes, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, daycares. If they have emergency operations plans and a list of contractors who can provide expertise in certain emergencies. Well, my emergency operations plan for the township needs to know who those contractors are. And my concern is, what if they all have the same contractors? If there is
Mm.
a big enough incident in my municipality and there's a list of 5, 10, even 15 contractors providing the same service to all of these institutions, there's not going to be enough hands to go around. Then
Saw that a little bit with Ida
that's stuff
setbacks,
that's like,
right?
these are the details I'm thinking about. So that is planning. While you can't necessarily plan for the exact emergency that's going to happen, you can plan for different types of emergencies consistent with the risk profile of your community. That level of detail is what needs to go into that. If you fail to plan for that, then you are planning to fail.
I will caution about analysis paralysis, right?
Yes, I agree.
Planning for the sake of planning does no good.
I agree. I think we spent a good amount of time this hour talking about
Yeah.
the need to operationalize a lot of these plans and to make sure we can actually implement them. That's super important. I say all the time, I think I've said it on this podcast before, at times, leadership is about making decisions with incomplete information. And that's sort of the opposite of analysis paralysis.
There's a great quote I try to put into all of my budget documents and capital plans, which is that action without vision is just passing time. Vision without action is just a dream. Action and vision can change the world. That kind of speaks to your comments about planning for the sake of planning, paralysis by analysis. To answer your question about can it backfire, my mind immediately went to an anecdote from my time in Susquehanna Township in Dauphin County, which is the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania metro area. And we did a fire study. It was probably 10 years overdue at the time. And it was really to have a framework in place for the regionalization of two of the fire companies that operated within that municipal jurisdiction. Fire is a very parochial industry. There's a lot of passion about the local company. When this plan was developed, and a lot of the action steps that resulted from it involved a regionalization and consolidation of these companies, that did create some immediate barriers and obstacles that will have to be overcome in its implementation.
Guys, we're at the end of the hour. Last remarks, lessons learned, things you want to get out there that you haven't gotten out in the last hour?
Be flexible enough to pivot.
Completely agree. Dave?
I think that's a good point. It's such an important part of what we do. The one comment I would make that we touched on in this episode, but maybe just to overtly state this, I think for us as administrators, sometimes a strategic plan can give us cover. I think it gives us protection. People may feel that we are driving our communities in a specific direction because we have an agenda. When we can say, no, this translates back to a defined strategic plan that had community input, that was deliberative, that was endorsed by the governing body, that's kind of a bit of a defense mechanism, I think, but gives us that ability to feel confident in our decision making and not be so concerned about how our actions will be perceived by some members of our community.
Yeah, I completely agree, Dave. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but managers at times are sort of accused of, well, you just think this is a good idea. This isn't your community. These are
You're
your own
running it. Yeah,
self-interest.
yeah.
And so being able to point back to something that's had robust community input that's been agreed upon and adopted by the elected body is super important.
Absolutely.
Planning is for everyone, right? Being intentional, understanding where you are headed and helping you to allocate resources accordingly is super important, regardless of the size of your community. I think the options become a little bit different in your approach, depending on the size of your community and the resources that you have. But it is for everyone. Don't let it become a back burner thing. Put that on the forefront of the mind. Be super intentional about it and dust that off when you get to this time of year, or maybe a little bit sooner so you can figure out how your next year's budget relates to it. Dave, Brandon, my favorite time of the week. Really appreciate it. This is Generation on the Rise, where we go there. Thanks for indulging on this topic. Looking forward to next week. Listen and subscribe, like and subscribe on our episode wherever you download your podcast. We're publishing on Unisquare and Substack. Super appreciate the listenership. Until next week. Thanks, guys.
See you then.